All right, welcome back to another episode of EventHubs Talking Block. I am John Catalyst Gray, and with me as always is John Velociraptor Guerrero.
Hey, we have a pretty big topic today, so we brought on Steven Chavez. Welcome, Steven.
Hey, how's it going, everybody?
To discuss the top 3 characters, arguably, but we've come down on a top 3 characters in Street Fighter 6, and the idea here is to put them under a microscope and figure out what is it that makes them better than everyone else, albeit maybe just by a little bit, because this game is balanced pretty well, but what makes them better than everyone else, and then hopefully we can find some common denominators that run through them all and say this is what's specifically the best kind of tool or the best combination of tools to have in Street Fighter 6. But I'm going to turn it right over to John, who's going to let us know who our top 3 are.
To me, this is not a debate. When you look through the various tier lists and other things like that, these 3 characters separate themselves entirely from the fold, and that is Luke, Ken, and JP. And I want to go around the horn here and just kind of see, like, that's everyone's top 3 consensus as well, for the most part. John, you already said that you feel the game's balanced. Maybe there's not a big gap between here, so we'll start with you.
Yeah, I can stomach that. I would maybe make a different top 3 as we have in our previous tier lists and such, but I can appreciate that, one, these characters are getting the most attention. They're making the most people frustrated as top tier characters. I'm down to have a discussion about them as the strongest in the game.
Yeah, I think this game is changing a lot, and anything could kind of happen at this point, but I think at this point in time, those 3 characters are standing above the rest. I think that's pretty fair.
Well, I figure we can sort of jump into it here and put one of them under the microscope first, and I will again turn it over to John. Why is Luke specifically by himself one of the absolute best characters in the game?
Yeah, I like to call Luke the man of 3 moves, because that's really all you need to win with him, even at high levels of play. We've got some footage here of NL and Korean Wrestling Man, who are 2 very, very high-end players that you see placed in tournaments all the time. And the 3 moves that you want to be using with them, and we'll go ahead and plop up this flow chart here. It's crouching medium punch, crouching medium kick, and crouching light punch. If any of these 3 land, go ahead and confirm into a big combo that does solid corner carry and damage. Wash, rinse, repeat. And you can actually see from the footage here, NL starts off with Luke, and he's doing some stuff besides these 3 moves, and he's going like, wait a second, why don't I just like flowchart my way to victory? And he does, and he completely dominates in the set with those 3 moves. You actually can throw in a little bit of crouching light kick and stuff in here. He does that a little bit as well, but you don't need to. You can just mash crouching light punch a little harder, and that will pretty much do the trick there. And this is great because crouching medium punch right now with Luke is going through this whole thing where everyone is like putting it on just like, like a bomb goes off and it's Luke like hitting crouching medium punch and stuff like that. It is a great move. And the best part about it is if you hit it or if someone blocks it, it's +1 on block, it's +5 on hits, fully special cancelable, and then it pushes the opponent right to a great range to crouching medium kick them. But if they somehow happen to close ground on you a little bit, just mash that crouching light punch there. And again, you will just go into these huge combos, great Okazemi. It's basically like Capcom just completely overtuned this character and said, hey, we don't really want people to have to use their brain. We just kind of want them to go ahead and just hit these buttons and win, and they did a brilliant job with that. That's pretty much all you need to do with this character.
Steven, do you have any notes on Luke and why he's the best?
Yeah, well, one of the best for sure. I think right now people are starting, I think some pro players are starting to say he might be number 1, or it's for sure that he's number 1. I don't know if I believe that yet. He's definitely really, really good.
We don't have these 3 in any particular order right now. Right? I mean, we all probably have an opinion, but we're not talking about them as 1, 2, 3. We're just talking about them as top 3.
Right. For Luke, it's pretty much what John said there. It's kind of do your best normals and then just confirm into drive rush, and then there's big corner carry. He does tons of damage. I mean, he's just a beast, man. I think the biggest thing that holds him back is probably his meter usage and his timing for the perfect knuckles and stuff like that. But even with that, I mean, he's really, really damn good. He just has tools for everything, and I think we're gonna get into this a little bit later. But he's got tools for pretty much every situation that he can find himself in. And if he's in a bad spot, he can usually use some of those tools to just get right out and get to an optimal spot, and then just pressure you and then get you cornered, and then now you're dead. And yeah, that's Luke.
Do we feel like his corner carry is more effective than the average character?
A little better. He's certainly not at the level of Ken, who we're going to get into here in a second, but it's still pretty good for what he can hit confirm off of, especially from a jab.
I do think that he's got a presence there. I think he hits like a truck. For me, the first thing that comes to mind with Luke in terms of his having strong abilities is the way he's able to bully. And I think you got into that a little bit, John, with what you were talking about between the juxtaposition between crouching medium punch and crouching medium kick, for instance. One, a lot of his moves make him move forward, so they occupy a deceptively large amount of space in front of him. And he's got a pretty scary red zone that also he can very well or effectively convert from. But you feel like you're outside of Luke's range and you're not, or you feel like it's your turn, but maybe because of that gap or that space that your fast move doesn't reach and his slightly slower move does reach just in the time to hit your recovery of your fast move. A lot of that kind of a situation. A lot of times when you're backed against the corner and you want to make your way out and it feels like he's given you space, he hasn't really, because of those forward moving normals that are very convertible. So that's the first thing that comes to mind with him, but he also doles out tons of damage, which I would argue just about every character in this game is capable of doling out tons of damage. But he does so, and he also can get there very effectively from the neutral. I don't know that his drive rush is anything to write home about, but it's still drive rush in this game. Very effective.
I'll jump in there and just say that his drive rush maybe in a vacuum is not that great, but when you couple it with his normals that he can convert off of, then it becomes extremely good.
Mm-hmm. And it's also really good for pressure as well. It might not be like a jury or DJ or anything like that, but again, like John was saying, kind of coupled with the rest of his tools, it's probably an above average drive rush. Like, and coming from somebody who plays lower tier characters and knows how bad drive rushes can be, Luke's is definitely it's probably better than average, I would say.
And also he uses it a lot to get Oki after things, after knockdowns. And I think that's a really important thing too, is that after he hits you, he can continue pressure in a lot of situations. And I think that's really important, something that I'll put in my back pocket, but remember that because it'll come back around in the story.
Before we go on from Luke, I want to talk about how to blow this up basically, because this is important. So his crouching medium punch, his crouching medium kick, and his crouching light punch are the moves that you want to look for constantly in neutral and stand right outside of those ranges and hope that the Luke player is fairly stupid and mindless, because that's about 90% of the Luke players out there. And you can sit back and whiff punish that. That is one of the main ways that you want to blow up this character, is basically look for him to mindlessly flail away with my flowchart here, which is what they're most likely going to do. And then you want to actually just put him in training mode and have him spam those 3 moves, and then take your character and figure out which of your moves blows that up on whiff punish. It is an extremely important way that you need basically a base level here. We've seen like Gotcha-kun do this with Rashid against Luke players as well. There is a very solid way of countering this, but it means looking for these 3 moves pretty much at all points in time.
Thanks. I'm going to use that later today. Okay, so Steven, why is Ken regarded as a top tier?
Man, this character, Ken has everything. I don't know if there's anything that character is actually lacking when you really look at it. He's got pressure, he's got mobility, he's got damage, he's got conversions, great anti-airs, he's got a command run, he's got a great drive rush, corner carry, everything you would want in a character. Really strong normals. He's got it all. And again, we're going to kind of come back to this when we talk about the similarities between these characters, but he's another character that if he's in his worst position on screen, which is probably being zoned out, right? Because he is a rushdown character, he's got tools to just bypass that and get in and close the gap and get to a better spot, whether it be, again, command run, whether it be broad drive rush or dragon lash, which the heavy is +1 on block as well. He's got ways in, and he's got so many things that he can throw at you that it's so hard to keep looking for all of them all the time. Eventually something gets in, something slips through, and it leads to big damage. It leads to corner carry. Just what doesn't this character have? And that's an honest question, because I really don't know. I think he's got everything.
One of the biggest things in this game that we talk about is mental stack, and everybody has a certain amount of mental stack to begin with, because everyone can drive rush forward, dash forward, jump forward, play footsies, drive impact. And so everybody already has those tools. But then if a character has a handful more, Ken has a run, Ken has the dragon lash, you start to get overwhelmed. And it's not that any one of these moves is particularly unbeatable, but putting them all together and saying that the other person has to juggle so many more balls at once, and if they are wrong, and you will be wrong, then Ken can take a really, really effective advantage of that, take you to the corner, and we've all been in the corner with Ken. I don't even think we've talked about Jinrai kicks yet, right?
Yeah,
but he's got options. So another way of saying it might be that he has options for days in the neutral to engage, and then of course once he has engaged, he's going to take you to the corner, and there his options only grow in terms of the offense, the rush down from there. John, did you have any more notes on why Ken is particularly good?
So his standing, heavy punch, and crouching medium kick ranges are where you do not want to be at. They are very far reaching, they're fully cancelable, and then he can do stuff like his Dragon Lash and his Jinrai kicks, basically to keep like his options from right at that range. You do not want to be at that spot on screen, and Ken has just a million ways to get there and stay there. You guys are talking about his corner carry, so when he does actually hit you with that, you get put in the worst spot in Street Fighter 6 where you do not want to be, which is the corner. Everyone sucks in the corner. And about the only good part about playing against Ken and doing with this is that you're going to get really good at being in the corner and defending against it, because that's where 90% of your life is going to be when you play against this character. This is one of the most mindless, dumbest characters I've actually seen. The more I'm seeing about Ken, maybe I'm just because I'm playing Aki, but like I'm just seeing this character just like mash away with his face on the joystick and get so many things that I'm really starting to think that Capcom did an extremely poor job balancing this guy. His game plan is so simple. His execution is very simple, and it's like you don't have to think or strategize much to play Ken. It's like just go ham with those moves and get in there, and there's some weaknesses here which I'm going to get into, but for the most part this guy has such a simple strategy that is so good and just so strong in the meta of what Street Fighter 6 is that I'm like, man, Capcom, you really messed up with him.
Push back a little bit on that in saying that he has a lot of options that are easy at low level to implement, right? You can just Dragon Lash at low level, and you're going to get a lot of mileage out of that. And if you Dragon Lash and they block, for instance, then you neutral jump and they go for that throw tech and you get a full jump and combo. It's pretty good. But it was Angry Bird that put Ken under the microscope, and when you explore the options, this is going to be true with any character, you do find that his options are not as good, but you have to have done the homework and you have to be at the
Angry
level
Bird, no, I'm pushing back on this.
And
This is bullcrap, because Angry Bird, no, Angry Bird, yeah, Angry Bird went in there and said, okay, here's how to counter Ken with freaking Ken, and it's like,
he used Ken in the example against him, but he didn't do a bunch of Ken specific stuff, which actually is a very nice translation, because one of the things he was using a lot of is Ken's standing heavy punch, which is one of the normals that is regarded as like really, really good from Ken. And we were talking about this recently before we jumped on to do this all, and I actually was like, yeah, you know who's a similar character but very much regarded as not as good is Ryu, right? He's kind of like Ken, and for that matter, he's kind of like Luke. Why isn't Ryu in this conversation? Because he's got a lot of similar moves. We put his standing heavy punch under the microscope. It's got the same frame data as Ken. It's a 10 frame startup. It's active for 1,000,000 years, aka 5 frames, and its recovery is 1 frame slower. But Ryu's actually reaches farther than Ken's by a half tick mark on the training mode stage. So Ryu actually has a better, in a vacuum, standing heavy punch. Ryu's crouching medium kick, 1 frame slower, but it has better range than Ken's. And we all know the power of a crouching medium kick. I'm sorry, did I say standing? I meant crouching. His low forward is actually better. So Ryu actually has 2 of Ken's best tools, better versions of them, and yet he is not as good of a character as Ken. But to go back to what we were saying there, he says you need to use, a 6 frame move that reaches. Maybe some characters don't have that, but he didn't only do a lot of characters only counter to Ken. That's not what happened.
I play low tier, and I understand not having some of these long-reaching 6 frame normals and other stuff that other characters have are not a good drive rush. Hey, Steven, you ever have any experience with that with Lily?
Yeah, Lily's fastest normal is a 4 framer, and it has 0 range. There is no horizontal range. Understanding,
it's
you have
ridiculous.
To be right on top of the opponent to hit that button. It's ridiculous.
I think fastest normals in this game are 4 framers. I don't think there are 3 framers in this game. Right,
but she has she does have one like a 4 frame.
So there's a good example. That's a good example because I agree that Lily's crouching light punch, for instance, her fastest move is balls in a lot of situations where others, like Luke, might get
It's
more
her standing
advantage
light
of it.
kick.
Yeah, standing light
And,
kick.
and her crouching light punch is 6 frames. by
Okay,
the
so
way.
standing light kick.
Her standing light kick is 4, and her crouching light punch, which is really good. But just for context here, it's not the 4 framers that a lot of other people have. It is a 6 frame startup normal.
Sure. So, but if you're Lily and you want to apply to, say, what Angry Bird was talking about in his anti-Ken video, which if you guys are having a hard time with Ken, it's worth checking out, even if you don't play Ken. Here's why. Because one of the examples is, well, Ken Dragon lashes in on you and you block it, you're -1. That's still a mix-up in a lot of ways for the Ken player, in the same way that when Lily gets in with a Condor Spire, she's still facing something of a mix-up, even though she's the one on offense, because the options that Ken has are not as prevalent and can be beaten by a lot of things at this point. So he's got to make a decision. And if she just rifles off her 4-frame move, and that's going to be at point blank range where it will indeed reach. And I would think, that's probably one of the worst 4 frames in the game, and yet it still reaches in this Ken specific situation. She's going to beat most of his options. He's got to specifically beat that, and then his options to beat her there are maybe, off the top of my head, I guess it's a jab. So like, how much is a jab going to lead into? It's going to have to spend some meter and such. But my point is that there is general strategy that goes into what Angry Bird was saying in this anti-Ken. It's not just you have to play Ken to beat Ken, and I disagree with that as like just the general view of that video.
Okay, so again, my problem with what Angry Bird said there, and I never said that you have to play Ken to beat Ken. I just said it was a poor idea for him to show Ken countering Ken, because of course Ken can do that. Ken has some of the best normals and best options to do that, and he should have went in there with some lower tier characters or some mid tier characters and showed the counters from there, because in the mirror, it's like, of course you can do that, because everything Ken can do, you can do back to each other. It just, I don't know. To me, that's a very foolish example, but you were citing specifically stuff about Lily. I want to turn over to Dream King here and see what he has to say about that.
Yeah, there are things that are universal, or like, in that instance, like if Ken is -6, Lily could probably punish with like a jab or something like that, right? Like, you're not wrong in saying that, Raptor, but it's also like, to John's point, it's, if you're using Ken to counter Ken, like the options you get to punish that are just way better, even off of a jab. What is Lily going to get from that jab
sure,
punish?
and that's
again,
just saying
like,
Ken's a better character than Lily, and I don't think anyone's going to argue with you on that point.
No. But what John was saying is like, hey, if you're going to show how to beat one of the best characters in the game, don't also use the best character in the game to show, because that's not the demographic you're looking for. The people who need help beating Ken are the people who are playing the low tiers. Go in there and lap that stuff so you can show the best ways of doing it, instead of going, oh yeah, like this is how you beat the best character in the game. Pick the best character.
I think.
And I know that wasn't the point of his video, but yes,
because I think that it can be on you to say, okay, I play this character, he's using a 5-frame move here, I need to find a 5-frame move. And if you find that you don't have a 5-frame move that reaches in the situation, then to that point, yes, you're correct, because it's not something that can be applied to everybody. But a lot of what was said in that video, there is an answer, and it's probably not as effective as what Ken does, and that's why he's a better character, but it's there, and the answers are there. That said, we're talking about Ken as one of the absolute best characters in the game. He does have advantages and such, and I think we've rounded most of those out there. I want to jump over to JP.
Before we move on, I do want to talk about how to beat Ken, besides what Angry Bird did as this crappy ass guide that even his training partner can agree with here.
See how you beat Ken is you pick Luke, or you pick JP, or you pick Ken.
Or you pick Ken, yeah. So right. Okay, so we've been talking about standing at the standing heavy punch range and other stuff like that. Don't be there ever. And one of the things about Ken players is they will often burn themselves out because they don't have a brain cell to think about in terms of like managing resources and other stuff like that. And they will go crazy ham trying to knock you out. And actually them wearing their resources out is one of the best ways of taking them down. Ken is a bit of a resource intensive character, and it's not a matter of if Ken is going to do these moves we're talking about, but when he's going to do these moves. And so always being ready for that, really working hard. Like, you're going to have to work like twice as hard or something like that to beat this character with most of the other fighters on the cast. Realize that, and then also realize that Ken player is going to tend to be very overconfident for very good reasons, and try to use that against him and be very patient and very thoughtful. But again, if you were playing Ken, you would be overconfident too, because that's just what that character is. So. So
I'd say practice juggling in your free time as well, because the better you get at juggling, and the better that those circuits in your brain are, the better you're going to be against Ken. All right, and then Steven, I already know you have plenty to say here. Why is JP regarded as perhaps one of the better characters in Street Fighter 6?
Yeah, he is another character like Ken that has pretty much everything. He's different stylistically than Ken because he's a hardcore zoner and stuff. He's most effective from full screen, right? Well, generally speaking, he's most effective from full screen, but also he just has tools for days everywhere else. He has one of the best anti-air buttons in the game, one of the best footsie tools in the game with standing heavy punch. I mean, he's got damage, he's got high-low mix-ups, he's got corner pressure that never ends, he's got OD counter. I mean, this character just privilege, right? That's what we call him because he's just filled to the brim with privilege, and you feel it when you play that character. He's another character that I think that, again, when he's stuck in his worst position on screen, which is probably with the opponent up in his face and he's cornered, right? All it really takes to get out is to land a crouching jab, because he can confirm into Cane Strike, which knocks you 3/4 to full screen away. He has an answer for everything, and again, like, he's just one of those characters. He's so oppressive and dominant that it's like, I think this one of the similarities between these the top three characters we're looking at is when you fight them, you have to play their game because they're so oppressive. You have to fight around them because it's like there's so many things coming at you. You have to play around them that you can't that just go in and
juggling
do your own
aspect
thing.
again.
Yes, and it's like unless you're one of those characters, you can go in, you guys will clash, and who's gonna get their stuff off first, right? But for lower tier and mid tier characters, it's like you kind of have to respect how strong they are. Like, you have to play around them. And I think JP's a really good example of that, where it's like this character just has so much, and it's like, man, they really made this character good in this game.
I'm going to turn it over to John to pile on, but before I do that, I will just say that crouching jabs or jabs into a light cane spin is not going to take you 3/4 screen. It's going to take you about half screen. John, what do you think about JP?
The distance it goes is slowly shrinking as we have more of these discussions. It's like, now it just knocks you right in
the first discussion was if he lands his bread and butter combo and sends you full screen, that's one thing. If he lands the jabs and such, it's significantly closer, which matters in his zoning. And we've already talked about that in 2 or 3
I
other
love
videos.
you, dude.
So
We're
you
not
guys
going
can
to
check
have this
those ones out.
discussion again. Yeah, it's 3/4
Right.
if you
That's
back
why I
row,
tried
it's
to move
full
on to
screen.
John.
Yeah, John, please save us.
okay.
For the love of God, save us.
John,
doing a
how
little
far
bit
does jabs into cane spin send the opponent? Go ahead.
almost full screen.
Yeah, thank you.
Almost full screen. It's very close to it.
Yes.
But anyway, so this is the best hands down long range zoner in Street Fighter 6, and he's a character you have to get in on because his options from full screen will just destroy so many of the cast members. And so the central role of JP is do not let this guy keep you out. And to take advantage of this, though, JP is a very technical character, and you do have to have a good knowledge of like fireballs and other stuff. Shout outs to Idom, who apparently does not understand how fireballs work in Street Fighter and gets zoned out by Knuckle 2 and says this is the worst game
John
ever.
is just going in across everyone.
Yeah, it's
Nobody
all
is
right.
safe today. Luke players, Ken players, Idom players, you're all getting
I
it.
don't play.
We're gonna call it out for what it is, right? So anyway, if you're gonna play this character, you need to understand how much privilege you have with that long range zoning, and you need to specialize in that, which not everyone can do. That long range zoning with fireballs is definitely an acquired skill that you have to pick up on. So to avoid the long range zoning, you really want to get in on him with drive rush, and then if you have them, dive kicks. Those are the main ways to counter his long range zoning. There are gaps in there that you can definitely exploit. They're not readily available. You don't often see them, and a really great JP player can mask those gaps like you would not believe. But the gaps do exist. Sometimes they're just a few frames in a window of time, but you really want to drive rush around to stuff, even if you're not hitting him, and jump around to stuff where you can, as long as you're not landing on one of his spikes because he's baited you into it, all that kind of stuff. It's so important to learn how to navigate his minefield.
I would say that he, like Ken, does make you juggle a lot. And while I don't think that he gets to just do it for free at all times, when he does have you full screen, it's a pretty free, at least one or maybe two, depending on how you field that first one situation. And you're kind of guessing. Those that, like, for instance, if you jump forward from full screen to try to take a bunch of space, which is not a bad call, but he doesn't do anything and he sees you do that, he can do an EX spike from there in the mid EX spike, which is going to hit you with both of them, send you back to full screen, and then he can do another spike full screen, and that's a big grip of damage just for that. And if he has level 3, hey, tack on a level 3, and that level 3 comes from a lot of different angles and a lot of different situations. He also has things like really good mix-ups that look differently than anybody else has when he puts a snap out on screen, and that's increasingly becoming the most important part of his neutral game. It's not so much that in and of itself is super good. It's that paired with his getting closer to you and you having to basically look up behind you and deal with the guy in front of you and what he's going to bring at you. And if any of that hits, he can convert it. And JP players are getting increasingly good at converting. And that does tend to send you full screen. It's either going to be full screen or he's going to have you cornered. All of those things are very effective. And then once he has you in the corner, his situation is very scary and can loop back into itself if you're wrong. So he's got a lot of tools there. And again, he is, like you guys were saying, making you consider a lot of different variables all at the same time. So I would say that that's what makes JP exceptional. Any other? Yeah. Oh,
I've got.
Do you guys want to talk about how
things
to beat JP?
Yeah, well, in this, so I want to talk about OD Amnesia, which is basically his counter move. This thing is basically invincible to everything, and then it can be waited out and punished, but the timing to do it is tricky, unlike any other move in the game. And that's how come this move is so regarded as like, what the heck? Like, you have to specifically lab how to blow up OD Amnesia. But here's the thing about it is that the inputs in Street Fighter 6 are so bad that GP players, especially if you drive rush him on his wake up, are going to struggle very consistently to get this move out. This move it doesn't seem like the down kick input would be like, super hard to do, but in the context of Street Fighter 6, you would be shocked at how often this move will not come out and not do what you want it to do. It is one of the more frustrating moves to actually to try to deal with in this game, just with the game's input issues. And so you want to use that to your advantage, realizing that if you drive rush on JP, yes, he might get that OD Amnesia out there, but more than likely he's going to struggle with that in some way, shape, or form because of the input buffer issues in this game. And then I will mention though that when he does get OD Amnesia out there, if you overcommit on anything, which means I think like, what is it, like a medium or heavy or like a throw or anything like that, JP can do massive, insane damage to the point where it looks busted and broken. I think 60 or 70% of your health is what he can get off of that stuff. So when he does a counter hit, he can completely destroy you if you overcommit. So a lot of playing against JP happens to be like, when you do get that Oki on him, throw a fireball at him instead of a normal or something like that. The projectiles are the one thing that can blow up OD Amnesia very easily. So if you've got it, make sure you put that on him, and then don't overcommit, especially if you've got him in the corner. Don't go for a throw, don't go for a bunch of other stuff, because he can completely wipe you out the one time you do.
Yeah, and just really quickly to add to that too, like using like meaty light pressure as well is good, because if he does OD Amnesia, it still gives you a chance to move and do things and try to throw him out of it and all that kind of stuff. So as John was saying, like, try not to commit to bigger normals and things. Just keep the pressure light and just kind of stay on him, because that's how you blow that stuff up.
Mm-hmm. I have a few notes here on how to beat JP. And actually, a lot of them come from Angry Bird's similar video on how to defeat JP. Now, I know he used Ken to do this, so it's completely invalid, but humor me for a second, guys. He highlights JP's weakest range, which is just outside of sweep, where his like heavy cane is going to miss, things like that. I'm sorry, heavy punch with his cane swipe. Most everything that he does from that range is a risk to him. If he's going to throw a fireball, if he's going to throw a spike, they could just as easily be jumped over. And his fireballs, although very useful in a lot of ways, are relatively slow on startup and with their active frames. So he risks a lot when you are just outside sweep range. He is not comfortable, believe that. Also, Angry Bird counsels to blowing up OD Amnesia with like delayed drive impact is a big thing. So one of the things you might do on JP's wake up is delay half a second, or well, that's even probably too long, just slightly delay and go into drive impact. And that will blow up the OD Amnesia. It is a double-sided sword, as I've said before. It's the kind of thing where if he doesn't hit with it but goes for it, he's spending two 2 drive gauge bars to get hit, which it's going to be a punish counter, which is going to cost him more drive gauge bars. It's a real bad news bears for him when he misses it. And then the other thing is conserve your drive gauge, because JP is especially effective at whittling away drive gauges, especially from full screen. You're going to spend a lot of it just to try to get close to him. And if he burns you out, he is arguably the most effective character at just continually chipping you. And even if he's not chipping you, you're in very restricted options. And we already talked about how it's difficult to begin with to get through JP's minefield. Try doing it while you're burned out. It's no bueno. Now, with this information, we all remember that Angry Bird and Kakaru met at EVO, and then they played a first to 10 about a month after EVO. And using this, Angry Bird defeated Kakaru 10-1 in a first to 10. He said, but this is a really, really strong player, obviously. And then a month later, he gave him a month to sort of do his own research, and they met again for another first to 10. And this time, Angry Bird won still 10-3. And actually, Kakaru hasn't, I don't think, won anything since, not first place, won anything since he won at Gamers 8. Take that information as you will, but that's what I would say. Any other information about how to beat JP from you guys?
Yeah.
I was just gonna add. I thought Kakaru made it to like top 8 or something in the Singapore.
He's cracked some top 8s.
Yeah, I think he was up there. But yeah,
but he hasn't won anything. Yeah.
Yeah. So the biggest thing to look for here against JP is his crouching light punch. That is the thing that whenever you get in on him, that move is definitely coming out. There is zero chance that JP is not going to hit that move, and so you want to stand at a range where that will whiff, and that you can hit him with a big normal and basically just kind of continue your pressure against him. And from JP, what he can do is he can do a crouching light punch and then standing medium kick and then go into his cane. We're seeing some footage here from Kakaru where he's doing exactly that. JP gets a million things off of his crouching light punch. It is very fast with 4 frames. It's got great range on it. It's fully special cancelable. There is zero chance you don't see this move when you get close to JP. And so you want to lab this. This is another one that you want to take in the training mode and then have him spam away at it, because you're going to see this in the match, and then figure out what your character's counters are for it very specifically, because if you can stand just outside of the range and hit him with a big button like a standing heavy kick or standing heavy punch or whatever your character has there to blow him up, you will win a lot more matches against JP by doing that one thing alone.
Steven?
Yeah, I think that's pretty good advice there. I'd also say add neutral jumps into your pressure when you've got him cornered. It's a good way to bait out OD amnesia as well, and if he does it, you have enough time to react to it, stuff like that. But other than that, I mean, I'm kind of looking at it through like the lens of playing Lily and stuff. So for me, it's a lot of like standing at her standing medium punch range and kind of trying to chip away at him and just checking him on things. So even if you have a normal that's not like, special or drive impact cancelable, and you've got something that's just a good check button, and that's a little bit faster, use that as well. Try to find that range and just kind of poke him out of stuff, because JP players like to be doing a lot of stuff at all times. So just try to check him where you can.
Use the old rib cracker with Lily, where she pokes you with those balls at the end of her. Yeah, that's a good move.
I love that normal. Yep.
Okay, so we've established our 3 really, really strong top tiers. What is it that the thread that runs through all of them in an effort here to try to kind of get an idea of what is it that's good, generally speaking, in Street Fighter 6? That if you wanted to make another character this good, this is what they would have to have. So what's the thread that runs through them all? I'm going to say Steven.
I think there's a lot, personally, but I think the thing that we kind of been talking about is what makes these 3 characters stand above the rest is the sum of all of their parts, right? Like, you have other characters like DJ or Jury and others that have some of these similarities, but they maybe the whole package doesn't work as well as it does for these 3 characters. So if we're trying to drill it down to something concise, I think that's probably the biggest thing we can kind of say there. It's the sum of all of their parts that works really well together, coupled with things like really good answers for their worst positions. I think that's another thing that's that's a very common thing between all of them. Like we were just talking about JP, if he's cornered and stuff and he hits that jab, he's going to get that space, and there's very low risk to do it. He doesn't need meter to do it. Like it's things like that I think these characters share that make them really good. And then again, of course, all the other things we talked about with, big damage and fantastic normals and corner carry and oppressiveness, like all these different things, I think kind of all with these 3 characters in particular, I think they just work really well and jive really well with their entire tool set. And again, ultimately they make you play their game. Like if you're playing a low tier or a mid tier, it's like you need to be aware of all of these tools and respect them and be ready to counter them at all times. And that's what makes them strong, because you can't counter them all the time. Like you can do pretty well, but eventually something is going to slip through and it's going to get you, and then it leads to the business, and then it's over, right? So I think those are kind of the main things we're looking at here between all of them.
I think John has a decent bit to say on this, and I think I have as much to pile on. So I'm going to quickly just point out that I was talking earlier about Ryu and juxtaposing him with Ken, and I like that because, well, like I said, Ryu and Ken are very similar in a lot of ways. They have a lot of the same types of moves, so they're easily comparable. And then people call Luke the new Ryu, and indeed he's designed to basically be Ryu for the newcomers, right? For the new kids. And so I look at that and then I go, well, two of Ken's most celebrated moves, Ryu has better versions of them. Why isn't Ryu better? And I would say it's exactly what you're saying there, Steven. What Ken does with those moves and what Ken does after those moves, and the threat of all the other things that Ken could be doing, the more that you have, the more, like the quantity of options that are strong, they're all going to make each other option even stronger, because people, like we say, can't be ready for all of them at once. And so Ken is overwhelming in certain ways. And then the other thing is, I think Ryu does have some good corner carry, but as I think about my matches against Ryu, there's a lot more of it that goes back into the neutral, and it goes back to like that Street Fighter 2 fireball uppercut kind of war. And Ryu can hit you. He can do some combos. He's got some good corner pressure, but he certainly doesn't have as much corner carry and as much pressure as Ken would, I would say, and as many ways to engage. Well, so even though he's got some vacuum better moves, they don't work together to add up to the whole like Ken does. You were gonna say there, Steven?
Yeah, and I actually just recently got Ryu to master as well, and just kind of playing that character and trying to figure out like what makes this character tick. Why do people think he's so bad and stuff? One of the things that I found with playing a high tier or a top tier versus like a low tier is that it feels like there's a ceiling that you hit with the lower tier characters and the mid tier characters, where it's like if you get past their best tools, they don't have anywhere else to go, because once you understand their best tools and you can shut those down, there's nothing really else to fall back on other than patience and really trying to play perfectly.
And it's easy enough to consistently shut them down because they don't have enough other options.
That's exactly right. So, yep. And if you play against Ken, it's like, okay, I've shut down Dragon Lash, I've shut down, Drive Rush, but here comes 100 other things. Here comes, running overhead. Here comes Jinrai kicks. Like, there's so many other things you can keep falling back on that by the time you try to get through all that stuff, you're already dead. It's like, well, okay. But the lower tiers and the mid tiers, it's like you shut down their main tools. There's not really anywhere else to go, again, other than playing really, really, really well and being patient.
Well, and everybody has, like I said earlier, a certain amount of mental stack. Everyone can jump. Everyone can drive rush. A lot of characters have like horizontal advancing moves that they can use to threaten from the neutral. And indeed, like we said, the balance in this game is pretty good. Any character can beat you, Like we're not surprised, and we're seeing more characters win tournaments and whatnot. So it's not that these characters are like a head and shoulders below necessarily, but they certainly are below these other ones, and that's the thing that we're getting at. But it's not to say that just because Ryu doesn't do what Ken does as well as Ken, that he's not a good character or not a character at all. It's just that this is what separates the absolute best from everyone else.
You're also seeing,
I personally very heavily disagree with these characters not being head and shoulders above the rest of the cast. These are hands down the best characters in the game. The results, the stats we're seeing, these characters are way better.
You got Jury, you got Chun-Li, you got Guile, you got DJ.
Not winning like these characters are. Yeah, these characters are the most dominant winning characters.
Yeah, and I think that when it comes to analyzing tier lists and seeing like the masters, it's like the numbers do go, but I don't think that's the separation is not that big in this game.
Well, the difference though,
I used to agree. Go ahead.
I was gonna say the difference is though that what we're talking about is these characters being head and shoulders above everybody else at this point in time, which I believe is true, because the other thing we're talking about is like, well, Ryu can be a character, but we're talking about potential that's not fully realized yet. So at this point in time, I don't think it's fair to say like, oh yeah, Ryu could eventually be there. It's like, that might be true, but he's not there now. With the current understanding of this game and the current meta, JP, Luke, and Ken are above everybody else because it's the fastest track to getting there, and they're so oppressive. But like eventually we might learn this stuff because this game is continuing to change, and there's some interesting changes that are happening already, 5 months in. But right now I think it's fair to say those characters are above everybody else because these other characters that might have potential have not realized it yet.
I disagree, but that's not exactly what we're talking about here. And this is just a matter of how big is the gap between top 3 and the rest, and fair enough. But John, what do you think the thread that runs through these best characters is?
So beyond what you guys have said, which you guys have articulated very well, footsie buttons are extremely important in this game. Dominant footsie buttons that you can cancel from and get big combos out of. I play Aki now, so I understand the very heavy lack of normals that don't go into anything and are pretty much kind of one-off buttons versus playing some like Ken or JP. Your options are so much more diverse and so much more incredible and neutral to land big stuff that is a game-changing, round-winning type of ability. And so when I look at these top 3, when I look at Luke, Ken, and JP, I look at their normals and what these characters get off of them and what they can set up with them. And I see that as the biggest through line, basically, of why they're dominant right now in this game. Footsie buttons, when you have something like JP standing heavy punch and you go to another character like Lily, who has, she's got some decent normals and stuff in there, but nothing even remotely comparable in terms of power, structure, and what that move does for JP, then you go, okay, like, I can't hit this button as much. I can't do this button as much because it doesn't work for me like it works for JP. That to me is the biggest standout thing in terms of normals. Footsie normals, I think are just dominant in this game.
Jury, for instance, has an amazing low forward, and that translates to a lot. Crouching medium kick, probably better than Ken's. I haven't put it under the microscope, but I think that tool she has, and she's got great damage, and she's got decent corner carry, just doesn't come together.
Here's my question: What's her equivalent to Ken standing heavy punch then? And how about her equivalent to Luke's crouching medium punch? And it's like so her crouching medium kick is probably as good or maybe even better in some regards than these other characters, but she does not have the other backing tools that mean that she can basically back up crouching medium kick with 50 other things and whatnot. And I do think that Jury beats JP as well. So, but yes.
I also think that something that's common between these 3 characters is the barrier of entry, and what I mean by that is like how long and how easy it is to access their best stuff, which I feel like JP, Luke, and Ken, there's no, like, we do know that JP is a technical character, but I feel like there's no like added layer to them that they need to consider. It's just you hit the ground running and you do their best stuff whenever you want, whereas we can even talk about somebody like Jury where she has her stocks, right, and you have to balance that as well to maximize that. Even
Ken, though, like his execution, like he can do basic things in the same way that, like, just Dragon Lash in, and that's really effective and does the job for you in a lot of senses. But when he comes in, he has to choose what route he does, if he lands the hit, and from what distance, and I think there's some nuance too, and his combos are similar, but that can also be a double-edged sword in that you can get confused and mess things up. It's like if you're in the corner, if you're this far, if you have meter and that. JP has a lot of similar stuff, and not to say that other characters don't have that, but I think that there is a simple version of Ken that is effective, like you're saying, but I think that he gets a lot better at the level of someone like Tokido or Angry Bird, sure, and the things that you're doing there. So it is hard to be really good with Ken. It's easy to be good with Ken. And I would say the same for JP. I think that there's a lot of stuff where, you have to, like, a juggle happens. It really depends on how far you are away from them, how much meter you have, and positioning yourself correctly to drive rush in with the right move and the right distance from the corner to pick up the combo. And it's like, when those things come together, these characters those are when you go, just drop the controller. It's like, this is clearly the best character in the game right now. And yes, but it's hard to make those things come together, especially consistently and especially in the midst of a match.
I agree, but what I'm saying is up front, there isn't any added extra requirement that you need to consider to play these characters. And what I'm saying is, you look at somebody like Aki, like, she's not getting any damage without poison, without proper setup, without the right exact situation, and all these different things that you have to consider. And all that stuff ties into itself, where it's like, oh, are they poisoned already? Where am I at on screen? Like, I need to get something first before I can do my big damage, before I can be as effective as possible. Lily's another character. It's I have to manage win stocks, and I'm not going to be able to do much until I get those win stocks in play and then manage them, and then I can kind of do this stuff. But JP, Ken, Luke, they don't have any of that. There's no added extra buff they need to juggle. There's no nothing. It's just you start the match, and I can do the best stuff from the get-go. I don't have to worry about ever being in a weaker state. I don't have to worry about any of that stuff. I just hit the ground running, and boom, there I go. And again, we go back to somebody like Jury that you were talking about. It's like maybe that's something there as well, where it's like she has to juggle her Fuha stocks and all that stuff as well to get the maximum out of that character, right? To get the optimal stuff. So I think that's also another consideration here, where it's like, and maybe that's also the key to why Ryu isn't as good, because he's juggling engine charges as well, and a lot of his game plan, revolves around that. So I think that's another thing there, where it's like, yes,
Jamie and Manon are, I think, real standout examples of having to jump through extra hoops to get to their best versions. So yeah, I can appreciate it from that point of view, that like they start as their best version of themselves. They don't have to jump through some preliminary hoops to get there.
That's right.
Yeah, and we saw again when JP first came out, like almost he had by hands down the most master ranked people playing him. So his technicality comes in later on, but early on, like Ken, Luke, and JP, they are brain dead easy. Most people that are competent in this game can get in and play those characters, and it's ridiculous. They're really ridiculous in terms of how they're structured and set up, and just really poor examples of balance, if you ask me.
So I guess our conclusion is that these guys not only have effective tools, but they, unlike the other characters with admittedly effective tools, they're able to make their tools synergize better than anybody else, and translate that to damage, and translate that to snowball momentum, where others might have to either reset or jump through a few hoops to get there first, and that all shakes out to best in the game. Is that fair?
Yeah, and then those footsie buttons and just so many things that they and low execution early on. It just so many things that work in their favor. So.
All right, well, guys, we're just three people to talk about this. We want to hear from you guys in the comments, and let us know if you agree with these three as the top, and if you agree, if there's anything else that runs through all three of them that we haven't mentioned here. It's like, why are these the best? What does it take to be the best in Street Fighter 6 specifically from what we've seen thus far? Want to make this more of a conversation than anything else with the FGC, so that by the time Capcom gets around to rebalancing this game, maybe they'll be a little bit more informed than they would otherwise. But I want to also thank very much both of my my co-hosts today for jumping on. Steven and John, you guys are the best. Even if we don't agree all the time, I still love you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Much love to you too.
All right, guys, we'll see you next time.